Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our presentation today. I'm joined by Professor Philip Kuhn, and he's our chief scientist, and I am the CTO. We will be working today to look at a reality check, AI and language processing in 2025, what works, what fails, and what matters next. This is going to be a pretty packed and intense presentation. We're going to rip through it pretty fast, so we won't go into too much detail. The slides and the recordings will be available afterwards, and we will also be open for any calls or questions, both on the presentation and on email afterwards. So the things we're going to cover today are top 5 advances in AI that you will want to know about, top 5 AI falsehoods that most people believe in, a quick snapshot of the language industry and where it sits with AI. We're going to do an introduction to People First AI and why every organization should care about digital sovereignty. And finally, a very quick peek at Language Studio 7, which we're officially launching today, but a lot of the materials will go up on our website early next week sometime, and as well as other demos and things. So we'll just touch on it today only, and we will dig deeper later on. Just before I start, there's also another webinar we'll be announcing tomorrow, which is our top 10 predictions for AI and language processing for 2026. If you're on our mailing list, then you'll get that automatically. If you're on this webinar, you'll also get it automatically as an invite. Please feel free to share that with anybody you want. Okay, so what are the top 5 advances in AI that you'll want to know about? Let's start with advance number 1, and I'm going to pass this over to Philip.
Yeah, so there has been quite a lot of breakthrough this year in multimodal models. So this is to extend text language models with audio and video. So there has been, for instance, the release of Llama 4 as a multimodal model, and models like Qwen Omni, which is also a multimodal model. So these models are all kind of at the foundation large language models that are trained on text. Text is really the best source for world knowledge, and they're then extended with additional data. So the audio models is actually worth pointing out. There's like 2 different parts of audio that people care about. One is speech, but then there's also music, environmental sound, and so on. So these models are both to kind of enable various speech capabilities like speech to text, text to speech, translation from speech to text, and so on and so on. But there are also models that are there to kind of explain audio. So you can listen to audio and saying like, what is happening here? And you can get like responses like this, like a ambulance driving by, and things like that. And for instance, also they give you like interpretations of the speaker, characteristics of the speaker, things like this. You can really interact with the audio that way. Yeah, so the other extension, next slide, is the extension with video. And again, there's also various things you might care about video. So if your goal is really to extend along the lines of text, speech, then in terms of video, we care about facial expressions, gestures. So these are all kind of signals that say a lot about communication. So a lot of interpersonal communication is actually nonverbal. It's in the voice and the style of the voice, but then also a lot in the kind of facial expression gestures. So they can be very well aligned with audio to kind of enrich the information that comes out of the communication process. And the other thing clearly we care about in video is images of the world. How do you being able to kind of create videos? Again, image understanding, just like we had earlier, audio understanding, all these kind of things you want out of video as well. Next slide. And the big challenge then, of course, is, are these models that are trained on video, are they actually able to also then discover the physics of the world? So traditionally, a lot of video processing techniques use abstract 3D models and physical simulations that actually obey the law of physics. So you can kind of hard code the law of physics. And now the goal is pretty much to learn the physics from video. This is still at the kind of the edge of the research frontier. It's not always clear if it is better, especially for like a limited domain, if you should have abstract 3D models and physical simulation at the backbone of kind of video understanding, or you should just do it fully automatically from video. So obviously you can feed in all kinds of video, and therefore you have a much broader coverage of the world. But let's say if you want to do things like self-driving cars, you wouldn't just learn from video. You would have a very specific model of the world at the backbone, and you learn from the video then particular properties about it. So the other thing clearly that happened this year, I think 2025 was for some reason deemed to be the year of the agents. So let's just go over that as well. That shouldn't be completely surprising. This was definitely where you even had like TV commercials talking about agents. So what the idea here is that you kind of break down what you want from AI into several different steps. And it's a very heterogeneous collection of large language models, existing tools, databases, and so on. And especially also the use of language models, not just to kind of immediately respond to a prompt, but also as kind of components in a large workflow that do things like create plans, rewrite plans, deciding to call other components, parallelizing things, maybe even using multiple different language models that have different abilities. So some language models might be good at code generations, other language models might be good at language understanding. So we're building now very, very complicated workflows of all these things. The other thing is that this also allows you to then actually take action in the real world, or at least in the kind of digital world that affects actual things. So filling out web forms, interactive databases, creating and executing code. So it's not just a text in, a text out process. It actually has a real world impact. So this is kind of a nice example of a topic that we cared a lot about for a long time, which is machine translation. So this is like a workflow that was proposed a year ago on how to do translation that follows the translation process of human translators. So we're not going to have just, ask ChatGPT to translate something. No, it now goes to various stages, like a pre-drafting research stage, then a first fairly faithful literal translation. Then it gets refined to be more fluent in the target language, and finally a proofreading stage. So this is kind of a very good short example of these typical stages you might want to have. So you might want to first do some planning, then you want to do initial step, and then you want to check how well things go, and you often have then loops between revisions before you finally end up with a final program. Over this year in the translation world, these things already have been refined with having in, for instance, as components, quality estimation models and things like that. Next slide. We're definitely at this point where there's a lot of talk about this and there's a lot being done in this space, but it's still a very, very challenging kind of setup. So if you build very complicated workflows, things can blow up at any given point in time. They're generally very hard to engineer, so they have a lot of steps that depend on each other. A step might fail, and then the subsequent step is just completely out of control. It's very hard to maintain. So if you change, for instance, underlying language model, you kind of move from GPT-4 to GPT-5, maybe suddenly all the responses are different, nothing works anymore. There's also a high cost to various inefficiencies. So if you just keep calling language models to make revisions, that just, eats up a lot of token use. There's also fundamentally always a problem if you should have a hard-coded plan, or you just let the language model come up with a plan, which components should be executed in sequence. There's also generally the question, should you just use large language models as a solution for everything, or should you use kind of pre-existing tools? So, trivial examples is if you want to add up large numbers, should you do this with a language model, you should do this with a calculator. Okay.
Okay, so advance number 3, the rise of Chinese AI and Chinese models. This is about cost, scale, and efficiency. So if you look at the data, it's quite interesting. You can see America clearly has the most unicorns, but China, probably surprising to many, has 284 of its own. It's just that they only operate in China, so we don't hear of most of them. You'll hear of ByteDance and things like that because they're behind some famous brands like TikTok. But when you look at it, the US is obviously the king here. Um, when you dig a bit deeper, the valuations are clearly skewed, and the non-American valuations are substantially lower overall. Now, there's many reasons for that. I believe it's part of a bubble and part of a hype, but we'll see how that goes in the coming 6 months to a year, I guess. Smaller nations in particular, they're having trouble. They have to focus on whose models and whose tools are we going to use. They don't generally build their own unicorn-size tools and products. Now, this is an interesting stat that just came across my desk yesterday. 80% of all startups applying for VC funding with Andreessen Horowitz are using Chinese open source AI. Now, that's quite a statement. This is one of the biggest venture capital firms in America. And it's not alone. This is a common pattern. So why is that? Well, first of all, if you look at the American open source APIs, the ones that label themselves open source, they're not truly open source in most parts. So for example, Llama models, Llama 4 can't be used in Europe at all. Okay, Llama 3 at various levels fails 9 out of 10 of the Open Source Institute's criteria for what constitutes open source. It only passes 1, whereas the Chinese models pass 9 out of 10 and sometimes even 10 out of 10. Okay, cost performance wise, the Chinese models have been very much optimized, and that's why people were quite amazed at DeepSeek earlier in the year, and it really shocked the industry. There's no vendor lock-in. You can swap it, you can change it. They've designed it to be moved around. No licensing traps, no kill switch risk, nothing like that. You've got accelerator independence, and this is really big. It's not just built for NVIDIA. It will work on a range of other GPUs, including Chinese and some other countries now as well. They're actually moving forward on that, so it can work on different hardware. It's not locked into the CUDA architecture. Very fast update cycles, right? And brutal engineering. Some of the stuff that they're just doing is just mind-blowing speeds. I've just subscribed to one of the Chinese models yesterday called Kimi because it blew my mind. It's beating, in my eyes, actual ChatGPT 5.1 on a number of tasks I'm doing, which is why I subscribe to that. But then I use 7 or 8 different LLMs, so don't be too surprised there. And number 1, global language strength. It's very, very strong in all sorts of languages where the Western models are failing. Now, when you look at this overall, how good are they really? Well, as I said, I like Kimi, and Kimi's just come out just a few weeks ago. Is it really as good as the American models? The metrics say almost. In some cases, a little bit better, but most of them are just a hair below. But that doesn't mean it's not usable. That means it's better than things like Grok or better than things like Gemini. It's the ChatGPT 5.1 that's standing ahead. Now, that may be different as of a couple of days ago when Gemini 3 just shipped. I don't have any metrics on that yet. Now, let's look at model downloads. This is interesting, Hugging Face stats. So OpenAI has the most model downloads, but right behind that is Meta, and then Alibaba, okay, and then a few others. But here's what's interesting when you put it all together. Chinese models are now being downloaded around the world more than American models. And obviously EU's way below because they don't have any models hardly to begin with other than Mistral and a handful of others. So in terms of just measuring against one Chinese model, very quickly you're going to see Quen more than likely pass Llama at this point. We're just waiting for the latest numbers to come in now, but the predictions are it's already passed Llama at this point. So you can see the flip happened in July. Chinese models overtook American models for businesses, and that's very significant. And that's not Chinese companies only downloading, that's global companies. Okay, now here's a big trend and big advance, on-device AI. So it's private, it's offline, and no-cost inference. So what you're getting here is one of the biggest changes that most people are not even seeing yet. So a lot of processing is moving down out of the cloud onto your device, whether it be your PC, your phone, your watch, whatever it is, it's moving down. That means the inference costs are plummeting. Okay, a lot of the processing is happening local. Now that's good in a way, because that means that your data is remaining with you, or can at least remain with you, unless you give something permission to take it away. Now, on top of that, you just got to look at a bunch of other things. So first of all, China is accelerating the shift because grid constraints force local compute. That's great. They're helping the world accelerate that. They're building devices that can do it. Industrial zones are building micro data centers right next to their overall power generation, as opposed to going the other way around. There's edge clusters of GPUs, so they're designed to avoid and move around NVIDIA bottlenecks. Workloads move to the factories, the ports, the mines, the cities, away from the data centers. Okay, all of these things are now possible. The data no longer travels, it lives local. Okay, this will avoid things like something like the Cloudflare outage that we just had a couple of days ago. Okay, it's no longer going to cascade across the world. So edge compute is absolute sovereign compute. Now, this means you get a personal stack. Every device is becoming a private inference engine. Personal AI is going to stack and run offline, private, unmonitored. People aren't watching unless you give them permission. Don't do it. Latency is going to drop to hundreds of milliseconds to sub 10 millisecond. You've got all this benefit, right? Now think of the military use, air-gapped from other AI, all running local. This is very, very powerful. Okay, and this is a new word for number 5. This came across my desk about 2 weeks ago. Gartner has created a word called geopatriation. I'm not a big fan of this because geo usually means local, as Philip and I were just talking about a little while ago. But this is the great cloud reversal. So in Gartner's definition, geopatriation means moving company data and applications out of global public clouds into local options such as sovereign cloud, regional cloud providers, or organizations' own data centers due to perceived geopolitical risk. Okay, now to give you an example of that, just a couple of months ago, the US government in a day turned off the Israeli military's compute. They lost all their processing. Okay, that's what can happen to anybody if they can turn off the compute for a major nation, allied nation's military. They can do anything to anyone, anywhere, pretty much. And this is, when I say they, I'm talking about AWS, Google, and Microsoft. Okay, so there's key movements. There's a shift to enterprise architecture, okay, and it's geopolitical, not technical. That's a big change. Workloads are leaving global clouds as trust collapses. There's a lot of trust abuse right now, and that ranges from policies and jurisdictional issues all the way around. People are just starting to have enough of trust abuse. Sovereign clouds and regional providers are surging globally, and that's very, very evident. Now, the big guys aren't taking this sitting down, they're pushing back too. But there is definitely a movement, and it's moving faster than anticipated. So digital infrastructure is now recognized as national infrastructure. Boards are classifying cloud placement as a geopolitical risk for the first time. You know, a few years ago, you might remember your credit card saying, "Oh, I'll never use my card on the internet." We trusted it after a while, mainly because America made it trustworthy. Visa and many other organizations made it trustworthy. Then nobody said, "Oh, I'll put all my data in the cloud," until AWS, Azure, and so on came along. Now we're getting critical risk by those clouds, and the workloads are starting to move back as that's recognized. So one of the Gartner predictions is that in EMEA, 75% of workload will be localized back into country on sovereign providers by 2030. That's a huge change. Okay, so we're looking at borderless clouds collapsing. Okay, nations are beginning to reassert jurisdiction. Organizations are pulling compute back inside. Sovereign clouds are being co-located internally, but things have to change. Okay, the future is not multi-cloud, it's multi-jurisdiction. Okay, so let's look at falsehoods that most people believe in. So falsehood number one, my favorite, the MIT stat. 95% of all AI projects fail to deliver ROI in 6 months. Now, the world screamed when that stat came out. But you know what? It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Let's look at this in reality. Okay, first of all, let's study the return on investment formula. Total investment, okay, over annual net cash flow, and you've got your years, right? There's no projects hardly in the world, doesn't matter whether it's AI or otherwise, that return total investment in 6 months. It's just not done. It's not normal. So it's a garbage statement to begin with, designed to get very high levels of media attention. Okay, so the reality is, though, things are happening. But there's a lot of failure, and people, and the media in particular, are marketing and milking on that failure. So lack of workflow integration, brittle and inflexible things, as Philip mentioned earlier, systems that don't learn or retain. And the biggest one in my books is where, as a management group, as C-levels and board levels, they're just throwing 50 years of best practice in the garbage and chasing hype. Like, let's not do these tests. Let's not do A. Let's not do B. Let's just jump head in without a plan, not even having a use case in many cases for AI, but they don't want to miss out. Okay, so let's look at the global norm for ROI across industries, not just for AI. Standard business cases are typically a 3-year horizon, not a 6-month horizon. So 6 months is just ridiculous. There are some payback periods that you should expect, 1 year or less, where you see the payback. Okay, and long-term investments, where they're capital intensive, could be 5 years or longer. This is normal across industries. This is not just something special for AI. Okay, but let's look at it in a more logical manner. Let's say the MIT number is true, just for a moment. I don't believe it is, but let's go there. So 95% of failure is the learning gap, right? You've got the investment, you've got all that. Okay, now, what's the 5% about? That's success, but how? Why are they getting there? How are they doing it? So, we have to look at how to rapidly overcome the learning gap with adaptive, persistent solutions. We have to embrace people-first principles, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but these principles amplify capital, not replacing it when it comes to human capital. Multiple smaller improvements are really, really key here. It's not, oh, let's do mega projects. It's let's have 5 little improvements a week that together add up to something big. Okay, design from day one for digital sovereignty and data privacy. Own your stack. Now, let's look at these numbers more realistically. In the last 3 years, there were an estimated 36 million AI projects. Now, if you were to believe the MIT numbers, that means 34.2 million failed, period. Total failure. But 5% succeeded. Now, let's put a number on that. That's 1.8 million projects that were successful. That's a huge success, because what they're saying is those 5% achieved ROI in 6 months. If you have it one way, you can't ignore the other side. So you're saying 1.8 million projects achieved ROI in 6 months? That's incredible results, right? That's fantastic. Now let's look at it a bit further. 60 to 80% of all IT projects fail. That's global averages. 70 to 88% of digital transformation projects fail. So AI is doing very well, especially given the hype, the lack of planning, the lack of use cases, and so many other issues around it, and the fact that it's brand new. People are learning how to deal with it. So, ROI in 6 months is unheard of. So give me 5% success. I call that a major success. Okay, last thing, what are they doing differently? The 5%, how do they make it different? So they integrate AI directly into business workflows where work actually happens, not as an afterthought. That's the first thing. They design for people, not just technology. They amplify human skills, they don't replace them. Okay. They build for measurable ROI, focused on outcomes, prove value early, and keep iterating, as I said earlier, small improvements. Own your stack and your data, make digital sovereignty a non-negotiable principle. Establish continued feedback and improvement systems. Learn, adapt, grow, get smarter. Don't do everything on day one. Okay, and I'm going to hand this one back over to Philip so I can catch my breath.
Yeah, so this one is the one that we really have to address because it's still out there. So this idea of that artificial general intelligence is just around the corner. And the extreme case of that is that AI will take over the world and kill us all, and calls for pauses in research and development, and we should just not do anything anymore. I don't know from how many people I heard this blog post of AI 2027 from a former researcher at OpenAI who lays out kind of a breathless report about like some arms race between US and China, and models that kind of optimize themselves is gonna just take over the world and then eliminate mankind. So I finally got around to reading it, and it's really just, I mean, the whole argument is really just by scaling things up and by letting these models self-optimize themselves, that alone is gonna just bring on AGI and ultimately Armageddon. I think this is we might have already run the course what you can do with scale, because we have the models that really haven't gotten any much bigger in the last 2 years, and we already used all the data, at least the text data that's out there. So there's not really that much more you can do with scaling. And also all that self-optimization often is really just kind of varying hyperparameters or architecture search. It's not really great innovation. So the reality is at the moment that AI is a tool. It's very useful for many different things. And I think it's still like a fantastic time to really explore what it is useful for. And people are discovering use cases, companies exploring use cases, building tools around it. So this is still an exciting time that things are happening, but it's not to the point that then the AI becomes self-conscious and becomes a big killer robot. And I think all this talk about AI being kind of the threatening thing distracts from the real risks of AI. So there's a lot of real risk with like AI deployment, privacy, data security, which we already mentioned a few times, and Dion also mentioned very heavily on the kind of question of digital sovereignty. There's a lot of problem also with that AI allows you now to create a lot of fake content, misinformation, that a lot of things get kind of flooded with that, and it undermines kind of what is real and what is useful, and makes a lot of things unusable. There's also some really issues with like how does education evolve with AI and people using AI and students writing their class essays. So the kind of skills that we expect people to have might actually be quite different with AI in the picture. Okay, back to Dion.
Okay, so one of the big ones, AI is replacing jobs at scale. Okay, a lot of people think this is happening, but the stats just don't show it. So labor data across the US, EU, and Asia shows no net decline in AI exposed sectors. Employment rises where AI adoption is the highest. So that might come to a surprise for some people, but that's the reality from the real numbers. Of course, jobs are changing. That doesn't mean jobs are decreasing. Okay, so especially at the low end where it's very manual, like data entry, things like that, obviously those jobs are disappearing. But new jobs are coming that are much more valuable. They're a bit further up the chain. So that's made it more challenging, for example, for students to take jobs. But then there's other issues there. So if you don't bring in the new people, I think that it's very, very interesting. How do you fill up your ranks over time? Your company starts to hollow out, yet they're not hiring as many students or interns and things like that. So I'm pleased to say we have a very healthy internship program with quite a few interns running here at any one time. If you're interested, check out our website. But on top of that, the mid-range is starting to hollow out and people are making mistakes. They're replacing entire things like call centers with machine and then having to undo it like Commonwealth Bank in Australia. So the reality is that net, there is more jobs because of AI than the other way around. Okay, now there's new operational layers emerging. Okay, AI auditing, workflow design, all that kind of stuff. It's much higher ranking than somebody doing data entry. The smaller firms are grabbing people faster and growing faster. There's lots of roles around the new technology, the on-device edge stuff that I talked about earlier, but it is removing the low-value work, and they either get redeployed, retrained, or they are going to have some trouble. That's just reality, I'm afraid. But it's not replacing humans. It is creating new jobs and removing some. But a lot of the things that are going away because of automation, not because of AI. Okay, back to Philip.
Yeah, so that other one is like one of the flaws that are really inherent for what AI is currently able to do. So that is the question of AI hallucinations, and there always seems to be talk. Yeah, we'll work on that. Like it is some minor flaw that is just worth fixing, but it's really inherent in what these models are. So the models are set up to more or less randomly predict next tokens in a sequence. And that doesn't, in any point in time, kind of guarantee that these tokens that are being predicted, this text that is being generated is true. It's just kind of something that is kind of in the mainstream of kind of words that are being produced, and people just add words after each other, and it's kind of based on probabilities. And there's nothing that kind of inherently forces these models to just say true things and not to say bad things. So the hallucinations really arise from kind of what the training data is. There's a lot of noisy training data. There's a lot of diverse training data, but it just kind of does something that is kind of in the general spirit of the training data, but it's not kind of in any way constrained by truth in any sense. So even if you have perfect data, that doesn't change things. And even if you do kind of methods to kind of fine tune and guardrail things, none of this is ever going to guarantee to to eliminate hallucinations. So all we can do is really just come up with methods to reduce hallucinations. So one clear strategy is to not just rely on the language model in itself, but kind of retrieving relevant information, inserting that in the prompt, and then guiding the systems to actually things that you think is factual, and then you think is gonna give you the outputs you want. This is also some really big component in these agent systems, that the awareness that there is hallucination, that it produces mistakes, that therefore you should also have components in the agent systems that kind of check for accuracy in various different ways. So this might just be another call to a language model, but it might also be really special components that do some kind of formal verification or informal verification of outputs. So we have systems that are kind of random and therefore will hallucinate. And the only thing for that you can really do is kind of adding these verification layers, audits, guardrails, cross-validation. And ultimately, though, we have to be aware that these models will make mistakes, and therefore there's a good claim to be made that they should be mainly used as kind of assistant tools, and they should be always checked by a human. So if anybody kind of claims this is something they can quickly solve, as kind of really overstating things.
Okay, great. So here's a big one. This is one that I've been watching for a long time. So many people think their data is safe in OpenAI, Google, and other LLMs and cloud services. The reality is it's far from it. So first of all, you have a couple of jurisdictional issues, and Alison asked some questions on chat about this. If they start doing things like data centers in space, what about that? Well, If the jurisdiction is owned by the US or a US partner or a US company, you're going to be subject to the Cloud Act. And the Cloud Act means that the US government can request your data at any time, pull it down, and not tell you about it. And the provider cannot tell you about it either. Have a look at the Cloud Act online if you're interested, but there's other things there that supersede all privacy terms or all terms of use. So even though there's a contract, you're not really safe. Models will still ingest lots of metadata. They're going to learn from your prompts. They're going to do things. Retention windows, things like that. There's a New York Times lawsuit right now. So even if you have API access and other contracts with OpenAI, all of the transactions and prompts and outputs that go through are being logged and kept indefinitely for the period of the lawsuit and may even be pulled in as evidence. So, you've got all this exposure. There's multi-tenancy structural issues, hyperscalers that running thousands of customers, of course. And in just many cases, your encryption key isn't yours, your key management's not yours, root trust isn't yours, a lot of things aren't yours. So the door becomes open in many, many cases. So the cloud is going to see lots of things that you don't expect it to see. It's going to see all kinds of inference information, who's accessing, how the data's crossing borders, model outputs, all sorts of things. Okay, so trust me, these things are not sovereign. You really need to dig in and understand how your data is being used, even if there is a contract that says it protects your privacy. Okay, so let's look at the next part now, a snapshot for language service providers, a very quick view of the LSP industry. So first of all, the promise of AI in the industry was translation, subtitling, data processing at a global scale, instant access. The reality, the hypes exceeding delivery. The myths about AI replacing humans, it's certainly changing the roles. When we first started doing MT, we were one of the first to do it for the language service industry. And everyone said, oh, you can't replace us ever, we're creative. Well, AI is creative too. Okay, that's the reality. We've moved on from that now. And the same messages I heard about MT 15 years ago, I'm now hearing about AI. The reality is that AI will continue to get better. It will continue to eat away at the role. Margins are getting squeezed, and that's a problem. Okay. But, the reality is AI can handle billions of words at speed. Humans can't. They sleep, they stop, they make mistakes. They can do things like multilingual ingestion and classification, pattern detection beyond human scale. They can do post-editing and things like that. Okay, but there's blind spots, there's massive holes, especially for tier 2 and tier 3 languages. Okay, a lot of this, though, will still require significant human work, significant human oversight. Okay, and a lot of the surveys are getting pretty scary. So companies like RWS right now, we've seen in the media where they haven't been paying their staff for the last 3 months. They've got a cash flow problem. And part of that is because the vendors or their vendor customers, end customers, are pushing back to longer timeframes for payment, as far as 6 months. So, the growth is pretty flat overall. But in some areas, there is significant growth. Large data annotation collection. One of my customers is seeing 50% of their business now that wasn't there just a few years ago in data work, not in translation work. So it's those kinds of things that are there. And then, when you look at it overall, okay, LLMs are an engine, but you've got to put all the other bits in, the wheels, the brakes, the steering, okay, and a fair amount of common sense, right? So bring it all together, get your data pipelines, add the human in the loop in the right places, workflow orchestration. People are expecting faster, cheaper, better, and you have to deliver. You can do all three. The one that's missing is maintaining your profit margins at the same levels. They're just not there anymore at those levels. You have to do more. Okay. Now, you can train models, and smaller models are getting particularly good. So, Philip, you were looking at a Chinese model recently in the WMT stats. That was pretty amazing. Can you tell us a bit about that? Have we lost
Yeah,
Philip?
sorry. I just pressed the mute button earlier. So, yeah, for translation, it's actually interesting that you can build a pretty good state-of-the-art translation model by fine-tuning large language models like everything else, other task, but you just need like a 7 billion parameter model to kind of get there. So it's not really anymore that you need gigantic models. So you have a particular task in mind and a particular purpose. You don't need the biggest model in the world. You can do really well with relatively small models.
Right, but there was one it was a
Yeah,
small Chinese company, right, that just blew out
no, it was
the
actually
results.
it was not entirely a small company. It was actually Tencent that
Oh,
and
was it?
Alibaba
Okay.
actually both. They just had like weirdly named the translation models that they submitted. Yeah, both bear. I mean, they both did what everybody else is doing pretty much. You take an existing model, a relatively small model, as we said, and then you just fine tune it on modeling data. You train it on parallel data, and do preference training, like all the typical steps. And yes, that's for like a specifically targeted task. That's what you need, and that's what works.
Okay, great. So what we are seeing, and this is one of Philip's favorite topics, is the inclusivity of lower resource languages is changing. So I know, Philip, you've specialized in that for what, over a decade now, focusing on low resource. What are you seeing in changes in that area?
Yeah, so that's actually quite interesting that the large language models builders are currently still very much focused on English and maybe a few other, maybe a dozen of commercially relevant languages. So the kind of push towards including, sorry, more languages, low resource languages that typically comes from kind of regional players that really care about it. So, you see development of Indian language models out of India. You see that from in various countries out the world. Like Singapore developed a large language model for Southeast Asian languages. You have European efforts. So this is kind of coming, but it's not coming necessarily from kind of the big players that kind of chase performance on English.
Right. And, when you look at the numbers, I mean, if you look at this circle here, there are more people inside that circle than outside it, right? Which is, a surprise to many. And then you look at the content that's on the internet now, you can look at various sources and they'll give you similar numbers. It'll be different numbers, but the representation's about the same. So this is from Common Crawl, for example, on the top right. So 43% of the Common Crawl web content is English. Only 4% is Chinese. Okay, and it drops notably from there. On the left-hand side, if you break it down, so 43%, 6% Russian, German, and then it just plummets to fractions of 1% rapidly. So even major languages like Arabic, right, where you have, hundreds of millions of people speaking Arabic, it's just not represented. Right. So, things like Czech are better represented than Arabic. Vietnamese is better represented than Arabic. And that's very, very interesting when you look at the overall stats. Now, look at it a different way. North America, right, here's your populations. It's not proportionally represented. Okay, so we're going to move on to some key topics now. First of all, we're going to introduce a concept that may be foreign to a few people called People First AI, and we'll tie that into digital sovereignty and why you should care about it as well. And then right at the end, we've only got 15 minutes left. We'll dig into a little bit of Language Studio 7 as a peek, and then we'll be showing it in full in the next few weeks. Okay, so first of all, problem. The trust is broken, right? We're seeing a lot of people feeling upset that different vendors are especially being unethical, doing things, anything from Meta targeting children with sexual content to misuse of data and things like that. There's obviously a lot of geopolitical issues and compliance issues at the moment, and you're seeing the European AI Act rapidly being diluted under geopolitical and tariff pressure, which is quite interesting. But we're entering a phase where the honeymoon's over, the AI hype phase is over. Now, what matters is results. We have to move on from POC purgatory and into something that actually matters. Okay, so people first embeds intelligence into complex, repeatable human workflows, automating the things that drain time, not talent. Okay, it doesn't chase enterprise scale transformation. It focuses on individual human processes one at a time and optimizes them, but then extends them beyond what they currently do. Hundreds of small, repeatable processes that are constantly improved. Digital sovereignty, on the other hand, ensures that nations and organizations retain full control over their data, their infrastructure, and their systems. So, unlike the other day where half the world found out that DNS and things like that, for a big part, 20% of all internet traffic goes through Cloudflare. So, at the end of the day, anyone, including organizations like Visa, MI5, and other big organizations, even AWS, right? ChatGPT, OpenAI, all of these things went down because they actually took a shortcut. Cloudflare is great. Nothing wrong with Cloudflare. It's needed. But there was no backup plan, and it's an almost no cost backup plan to have a few key things in place. You're talking hundreds or thousands of dollars. You're not talking even $100,000. And these are companies that are worth billions, and they're just not taking basic steps. Okay, so people first AI, the goal is to automate 70% of the grind, not the value stuff, but the grind, and get that out of the way. So the initial targets are things like sales and marketing, procurement and finance, legal and compliance, research and analysis, and ops and customer support. Take away the grind so that people can do more, and then automate what they do as well, the best, so that they can do it even better. Okay, so we heard earlier 85%, 95%, 80%. It doesn't matter what number. It's high, but it's normal for IT, right? So let's get out of that. Let's focus on what really matters. I mean, if you go out there today, you got the Wolf of Wall Street type thing happening. Sell me this pen, and the first thing they say is it's powered by AI, right? Nobody's asking what it does. They're just saying AI, AI. So our Language Studio platform is one of several, but we're very focused around people first AI by designing around these features, these workflows. We focus on real workflows with immediate benefits, not in 10 weeks, not in 10 months, not even in a year, but immediate, like same day, drag and drop, go. Okay. The goal is to reclaim human time, built overall to remove the grind, as I mentioned, scale what humans can't, and to keep the human in the loop. All of it is critical. Okay. Then we move to digital sovereignty. Okay, there's 5 non-negotiable pillars, basically, that digital sovereignty covers. Narrative freedom controls what's seen and who's allowed to speak and how it's shared. Model autonomy is everything about building, deploying, auditing, all around that. Infrastructure control, where and how you compute. Data control, own, store, and govern your own data and how it's used. And a very important one, the right to exit. You should be able to move between technologies relatively easily. And a lot of systems cannot do that. They lock you in. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of these in detail here. These slides will be downloadable a little bit later, but it does detail things like infrastructure control, model autonomy, and what it means in more detail. Okay, so let's have a quick look at Language Studio 7 now. We've got 10 minutes left. I'll try and do this in 5 minutes and then open up for a few questions. If you have any questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll go from there. So what we've been doing beyond the hype is we've built a sovereign platform. It runs 100% offline if you want it to, completely disconnected from the internet. Okay? Very, very few systems can do that. And we deliver major functionality all in a single platform. So we deliver translation, transcription, OCR, file conversions, analysis tools, conversational AI, okay, business AI tools, linguistic tools, workflow management, broadcast tools, generative AI, hooking into all these different open models, and text-to-speech, all in a single package that can be deployed behind your firewall, 100% secure, where you take control and own all of your data. It never leaves your network. Okay, this is our visual workflow designer. Okay, it's drag and drop. We have around 300 Lego blocks that are AI powered. Agents and things like that can run and do a whole variety of things. So I'm going to just drag and drop one of them over here now. And I'm going to show you something we did for one of our customers. And I had to laugh when they asked us if we can do it. They said, can you make a platform for us or a tool that will translate child speech, they called it Gen Z, to pensioner, adult speech, right? So here's the workflow we built. This didn't take long. It took about half a day, and it goes through, it analyzes, okay, it's converting things, okay, it's calling AWS Bedrock with Llama 3 or Llama 4 in this case, okay. It's doing a few processes over here, it's chunking it and analyzing it and doing a few bits, and it's bringing it together. It's looping through to process the whole file and then coming back out the other side. Now, the result is this. Right, let's start with a few here. I'll just zoom in on this. Okay, so bro was low key, NPC vibing, whole convos side quest energy. I have no idea what that means. I'm too old. Yeah, man's filler character for real. So we translated that by understanding the context, everything around it, and what they're trying to say. That guy seemed like a background extra. Our conversation was pointless. Yes, he felt like an irrelevant side character. These are the types of things that we can do. Okay, so we can now translate Gen Z to pensioner. And we can even do it with the emojis in it as well. So here, you can see the different ones, emojis on the end, emojis in the middle. Besties, BF, sus, flag, eyeballs, speech bubble, late night text, water. Right? My best friend's boyfriend is suspicious. He's sending me late night flirty sexual texts. Right? So all of these things can be there. Now, this is where we're seeing things like things in police use and things like that, where they're looking at crimes that have been committed and understanding how, even in the same language, a different group is speaking. So these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with there. Okay, so we've built all sorts of platforms and tools around this, whether it's advanced media processing, translation, we've got tools for building chatbots, asking my documents things securely, navigating data, answering forms, generating images, all of these tools. Okay, so you can see there's a wide range of functionality. Now we go more specialized. So for example, analyze my meeting. We have lots and lots of templates we're building out for different meeting types. A board meeting has different outputs and different analysis than a sales meeting or a leadership meeting or an employee onboarding meeting. And we process all of these in context and produce the appropriate data. Now, these are all workflows that you can then take and modify and tie them into your infrastructure and adapt them the way you want them. Okay, now the last thing I'm just going to touch on is it's extremely scalable at different levels. So this is an example of smaller pieces of the system based on a particular customer's requirement running on AWS in a single standalone server. Here is a mid-range system where we have frontline, public subnet, private subnet, and data layers with load-on-demand servers that are scaling so that they can do, for example, LLM and knowledge graph in real time, or text-to-speech and speech recognition in real time, those kinds of things. And here's one that's full-scale, multi-region, multi-availability zones, and so on. So you can see the system can be deployed to the largest levels or to the smallest levels as required. Okay, last thing, our moat. So we have deep structural differentiation. It's fully self-hostable, modular, completely air-gapped if you want it to be, away from the internet. No dependency on any APIs, on OpenAI or anybody like that, or Google, built on open standards. It can call into your external system. The tools publish as APIs outwards so that you can call in from outside your other applications. It's GDPR compliant, ISO 2701, and so on. It's got all of these things built in by design. It's control-centric. You can do custom model training next year. We're building a tool to train your own models, even on-prem. And it's built around people-first AI with hundreds of pre-built workflows. Okay, that was our very rapid express presentation for today. Do we have any questions? Let's see. How can the presence of low resource languages be increased? What is missing and how should it be approached? Go for it, Philip.
Yeah, so this is actually a topic I do very active research on. So that some of the questions are still, we'll be exploring new things. But the basic methods are really, you can do a lot with fine tuning on the monolingual text and also the parallel text of low resource languages. So once you add parallel text, it then links the low resource language much closer to English or other high resource languages, and therefore can much better take advantage of the capabilities of English. So there's a real discrepancy usually with low resource languages that if you just train on them a little bit too much in isolation, they're kind of separated from what can be done in English. But if you add like parallel text, it actually links it much better. So that's what typically is being done. That's kind of the easiest things you can do.
Okay, great. And okay, there was an AI symposium at Georgetown 2 days ago with Jeffrey Hinton. I've not had a chance to listen to the entire session. However, what I did hear was comments on AI replacing a lot of starter jobs. Also, from my own experience, there's still a lot of issues around hallucination, spelling, etc. I'm not seeing a question here. There needs to be some kind of controls. What is being done to mitigate these risks? There we go. Any thoughts, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on some of these things. Like we made the point that hallucination is just really a core challenge, and you need to be aware that these models make mistakes, and therefore you need to build around it. That means, for instance, that you don't just fully automate something and then throw it out. You have to have an expert behind it. So, to pick up the legal example, so don't run things through ChatGPT and submit it as court filing. That's going to get you in lots of trouble. But yes, it has the ability to kind of replace a paralegal, where then the actual lawyers looks at the output and checks if that all makes sense. But it can speed up a lot of kind of research for related case files and so on and so on.
Okay, and I'll just add to that. I mean, in our workflows, we validate all the way through. We have multiple prompts checking other prompts. We expect failure. And the reality is, in many cases, failure can be as high as 40 or 50%. It depends on the data that you're getting, especially with unknown data coming through. It can distort things. Also, there's the other side of it, where people are attacking through it. So, it's almost impossible to protect from prompt injection. I mean, one of the easiest ways I just discovered recently from somebody else was simply writing your prompt injection in phonetics, and the machine will still understand it and execute it. So as simple as that, but that will bypass most filters. Okay. What are you hearing from your clients about the trends within enterprises vis-a-vis their expectations, demands, changes to staff structure, etc., and the impacts on service providers? I'll take that one first. So from our clients, what we're actually hearing is that they're hungry for knowledge. So, some of our customers are actually saying, can you come and train us how to do this? Because our people don't know. The system's great, but we can't use it to the full value unless our people start thinking the right way. So I think that's really important, that people start thinking of how to assemble workflows, assemble Lego blocks and things like that. And there'll be a lot of activity in that space, I think, as technologies like MCP really take off and more workflows and agents get componentized. Any comments on that, Philip, or shall I move
on? No, not so much on the enterprise stuff, no.
Okay, if the paralegal isn't needed, isn't that a job loss? Absolutely. But as I said earlier, there's job losses and there's job gains, right? You don't just sit there. I mean, the blacksmith, there's still blacksmiths around, but they were replaced by something better, cars. Okay, so, there are new technologies, new roles. just because one job is gone, other jobs are opening up. And what I said earlier is that there are more jobs opening up than there are disappearing. Okay, any other questions? Last chance. Okay, if you would like more information, have questions or anything around that, please feel free to reach out to sales@omniscien.com. It doesn't have to be a sales question. I'm happy to answer it there. So is Philip and our team. We will be posting this online tomorrow, and you'll be able to get the replay as well as the slide deck. Thank you very much. Don't forget to look out for our webinar on the 1st of December, and we will be talking on that day about top 10 predictions for 2026. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, have a great day. Bye for now.